Greetings and welcome to our program. We have a lot in store for you in terms of our dairy history in Loudoun County, and I'm sure you're fascinated with this information. I'm Gary Clemens, your clerk of circuit court in Loudoun County. My historic records team has a wonderful program to share insights into what life was like on dairy farms many years ago in Loudoun County. This program is special to me personally because I grew up in Western Loudoun. I recall as a boy and later as a teenager when I started driving, riding my bike and later driving my car through many areas, particularly dirt roads in Western Loudoun, where there were numerous farms, many of which were dairy farms. The landscape has changed tremendously over the past 30 years in Loudoun County. We don't have the dairy farms we used to have, but the history of dairy farms is indeed fascinating. I just want you to know that the information you're receiving through this presentation includes references to historic records, many of which you will find in the courthouse in downtown Leesburg. While I am the custodian of these historic records, and my historic records team and I do everything we can to protect and preserve these records for future generations, what's important to note is these are your records, the people's records. So I encourage you to come visit my historic records office, avail yourself of these valuable documents, go through them and learn about the valuable history that we have here in County. Now, I hope you will enjoy the program on dairy farms in Loudoun County. It's my pleasure now to introduce our first speaker, Eric Larson, who is my historic records manager. Thank you.
Okay, welcome to tonight's program here in the Historic Records Division on the history of dairy farming in Northern Virginia. We want to welcome AnneMarie from the Loudoun Farm Museum. We want to thank Shannon Fuller, who will be tonight's host, introducing us and also doing our Q&A session. The program is going to be in 5 sections tonight. The first part will be my presentation, where I'll give you a short overview on the history of dairy farming in Loudoun County, really looking at the major things that influenced dairy farming in Loudoun County. Second part of the program will be by AnneMarie from the Loudoun Heritage Farm Museum. She will be talking about the Eads Farm out in Countryside. And then the third part of the program will be from Lori Kimball, and she will talk about the last days of dairy farming here in Loudoun County. We will conclude with a question and answer session, and we hope you all have plenty of questions for us tonight. We enjoy answering questions. And then at the end, there will be a program survey link, and we hope you all fill out our program survey and send it to us so we can find out what worked, what didn't work, and maybe some ideas for future programs. So I'll get started with a brief overview of history here of dairy farming in Loudoun County. As Gary Clemens had mentioned in his introduction, he talked about the milk dots, drops on the flag, and that's what this is the Loudoun County flag, and those are the milk drops here, because the dairy industry was so large here in Loudoun County. Probably wondering what all this is over here. Those are actually wheat plants, because of course grain crops was a major agricultural item in Loudoun County for hundreds of years as well. So why did Loudoun County become such a dairy industry in the state of Virginia? Well, number one, you have to have good soil and land. Loudoun County actually sits in a pretty rich belt of farming land that stretches really from Maine all the way into the deep south. We have about probably 24 different types of soil, give or take. And the dairy farms actually themselves don't need the best land in the world to raise their dairy cows. Matter of fact, when we go through this program today, you're going to find out a lot of the dairy industry is right down here where my arrow is. Actually, the bulk of it here is down where the airport is today, which Lori will cover in her program. This rich green belt is another rich area of farmland. And of course, dairy farms will pop up out here as well because of the rich soil and also for another reason. A little more on soil and land. One of our favorite plats in our collection is from the 1880 Palmer Taylor Chancery case of 1880. In this was a beautiful plat. It's about probably about 18 by 36 in size. It was done by James Odin. For those from Loudoun County, James Odin is a famous surveyor, and he's really known for surveying the town of Waterford. But in this wonderful plat, he shows a farm in 1880 that actually was part of the George Taylor estate, and that's what this whole case is about. But on it, he also put little dairy cows on here as well, in the woodlands and the Broad Run Creek. But what's interesting about this, we're able to place where this land was, just to show you how things have changed over time in Loudoun County. Okay, this is actually very close to the airport. This is the land, what it looked like in 1957. There's Broad Run, which you see right there. And there's the land, the plat right there, and the land going up. It's almost completely intact as it was in 1880. Kind of looks like a fish in this photograph, but this is the property right there. Okay, so what happens? Where is it at today? Just to show you how things have changed in Loudoun County. This is where the George Taylor's farm was. This was just a 283-acre tract of land out of 960 acres that he owned at the time of his death. This is where the plat is. It's down here. This is Digital Solutions, I believe, server station and campus. This is Loudoun County Parkway, and you can see it up here. This was once just a huge tract of land for farming, for both grass and grain crops, and then also dairy farm. But just to show you how things have changed. Okay. So you have the land, you have the soil. What else do you need? You need a market. And we are just outside Washington, D.C. And by the time the Civil War ends, going into the 1870s and 80s, we have a market of creamery or butter popping up in Loudoun County. There was a great demand for fresh butter and cream in Washington, D.C., and it was a market that sprung up very quickly in Loudoun County. One of the well-known ones and larger ones in Loudoun County was the Kingsley brothers. This is their warehouse out in Hamilton, Virginia. And this is actually the charter that they chartered the company here in the courthouse in 1870. And this is actually from the charter book that started this company right here. Okay, as time goes by, a huge industry with Washington pops up, even a special corporation for the Washington milk market to help bring in more milk products from the western counties, the west from Washington, D.C. Okay, so now you got a market. Now, how are you going to get it from market to the city? Well, another thing, we have a railroad system that stretches all the way from Alexandria out into Bluemont. And this railroad was intact before the Civil War. Of course, it will expand after the Civil War. And here it is. Here's Alexandria. This is from a Chancery case, a beautiful plat that shows the rail line running all the way out to Bluemont. Then just so you can just see all the different stops around the way, I found this on the internet showing all the stops along the old Dominion Railroad. This is important because any dairy industry along there, they can use the railroad to ship the material into Washington, D.C. That means not only fresh cream and butter, but also, since it can be done in a day, you also start seeing milk being shipped by rail into Washington, D.C. Now, before you have cooling systems and way to preserve your milk, the railroads was the quickest way to get it into the city. Okay, how important was land along the railroad? Well, we have several Chancery cases where land came up for sale because of either they were collecting on a debt or a family was just selling off the property to probate a will. Well, what's interesting about this one, here's 102 acres of land, and in it you can see attractive to anyone wishing a home near the R&R depot in the community, well situated with schools and churches. Just like modern day real estate, they list the aspects or the positive aspects of owning property near businesses, schools, and in this case, railroads. So if you wanted to start a dairy farm, you were close to a railroad that you could tap into. Now, the other transportation that comes in It's going to be roads. And this is going to be one of the big drivers of the dairy industry here in Loudoun County as well as Fairfax. With a road system by the 1920s and 30s, by then you have a federal and state road system going through Loudoun County into Fairfax over to DC. You know, here's roughly Route 7, Route 50 today. These were actually what we would consider like interstate roads today, but then you have roads, state roads going north, south, east, west, connecting all this farmland together. If you can get a truck out into Loudoun County, a milk truck to ship your milk in, it's great because now you don't have to depend on the railroad. The trucks can come out daily, which they did. You can have the milk loaded onto the trucks. The trucks then take it into Washington, D.C. Now, I'm using most of the stuff, a lot of our stuff tonight you see on my slideshow is from our collection. This is the only one I could find of a milk truck, but it was from an accident in 1962. But Sealis was one of the big milk producers and also one of the big transportation of milk here in Loudoun County. But this is his truck. It's from an accident case from the 1950s. Okay, talking about roads again, here's something from 1929. Okay, this is 457 acres being sold off in the eastern part of Loudoun County. Now, if you notice on here, the farm is about 3/4 of a mile from the state road, which shortly will be completed, which has been designated as route number 54. Route number 54, we believe it's probably part of what is Route 7 today, because it mentions a road that runs from all the way out from Stevens City all the way to Tyson's Corner in Loudoun in the 1930s. So this farm, 457 acres, is over here along the Sugarland Run. So this is right on this. The acreage was right on the edge of Fairfax and Loudoun County, and actually the deed itself says that it runs along Sugarland Run. It was one of the boundaries of the eastern portion of the property. But once again, you're 3/4 from a mile from the road, and once again, it's saying up seeking a dairy farm. So location, location, location here. Okay, now you got your soil, your transportation, your market, but now you need something else to really kick this into overdrive, and that's power. Realize really before 1930, there's power in Loudoun County, but most of it is within the town limits. Not very much power gets out into rural areas of Loudoun County. So a lot of the milk production at this time is the old-fashioned way of milking the cow by hand. Things change in the 1930s with the Depression, and the federal government starts the Rural Electrification Administration, RE8, and this gave money to rural communities across the United States and in Loudoun County to set up providing electricity to the rural areas of Virginia. During the 1940s into the 1950s, we have tons of easement plats like the one you see here. This is an electronic easement along Lester Solomon's property. Lester Solomon is one of the big dairy farmers in Loudoun County. And here's an electric line being an easement being placed through his property. This is interesting too. Lester Solomon's farm is in the area of, this is where the easement would have been, this bridge going across Broad Run Creek. His property is basically what is, I believe, the 1757 golf course complex off Waxpool Road today. So this is once again, down in the key area of dairy industry, down by the airport in Loudoun County. Electricity provides milking machines. This is really drives the dairy industry, because now you can rely on electricity to have a milking parlor like you see in this photo, and milking machines where a machine can do, dozens of cows at one time, where a person would have to go from cow to cow to cow. So they can milk the same day and transport the milk the same day as well. Or not, if not, electricity also provides them the ability to have chilling or cooling units at their farm to preserve the milk. Okay, now you have the next thing you need is you need a good crop, not a good crop, you need a good breed of milking cows to make a profit. So in Loudoun County, and as well as other dairy counties across the U.S., everything depends on the bull, obviously. Now, early on, you could go to auctions like this one here we have near Lincoln, where he's talking about 4 horses and 1 milk cow and 1 bull. There's the important part, 1 bull. Also, you have companies throughout Loudoun, Fairfax, and Fauquier County where you could buy Guernseys, um, because Guernsey was the big cow early on for milking, but also bulls. Okay, the reason you want to buy a proven bull, like you see in this article here, is a proven bull's offspring, female offspring, will have be able to give large volumes of milk per year. So the better the bull, the better your milk is going to be, or more profitable your milk is going to be as well. Okay, so here you could buy, have the bull, have a bull um, with your stock of female cows. Or by the end of World War II, we get into something now that everybody does today in the dairy industry, and Loudoun County actually led the way in the 1940s, and this is called artificial insemination. This is where a dairy farmer will actually buy bull semen from companies across the United States to impregnate their cows. This was a way farmers could look at charts of cows on what the milk production was of certain bulls' female offspring. Loudoun County had a bull called Rag Apple Elevation. Now, for people who know me, I love Rag Apple Elevation. He was the cow of the century for in the 20th century. In his lifetime, he produced about 40,000 males and over 50 some thousand female Holsteins. Okay, his females were known for very, very large volumes of milk that they produced. So popular that even John Lennon of the Beatles, believe it or not, had a cow farm in Southwest Virginia, actually bought offspring from Elevation because it was so well known because of the female offspring. Okay, now we're reaching now the peak of production here in Loudoun County and dairy production. Now, Lori's going to talk about peak production and then it finally declines in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. But to show you just how things work, in 1909, you had 4 million pounds of milk sold yearly. Okay, as time goes up, you see it starting to increase because one, you got a railroad system. Then you got the road system kicking in, especially after the First World War. By the late 1930s, during the wartime period, this is when the electricity is kicking in. And you can see how the production just increases and increases, and it keeps going up, and then it peaks in 1959. And of course, after 1959, things will start to decline, and it's because of this area right here, Dulles International Airport. But Lori's going to talk about the decline of dairy farming in Loudoun County. So in closing, like I said, why Loudoun had such a productive dairy farm? One is its rich soil. Two, they had a market to tap into. They had the key components of transportation with railroads and roads. Three, they finally had electricity that came into the county that farmers could tap into. And then fifth was the ability to either buy bulls or through artificial insemination to make sure that their female offspring were some of the best dairy cows you could possibly have on your farm. So that's my presentation. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it on to AnneMarie from the Farm Museum, and she's going to talk about one of the big African-American dairy farms over in the eastern part of Loudoun. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm AnneMarie Kirilason with the Loudoun Heritage Farm Museum, and I'm going to be doing a little bit of a case study about one of our farms here in Loudoun that was owned by an African-American family. And I'll be touching on a couple of the other families that were in the neighborhood, just to give a bit of an overview of the area. So I'm newer at the Farm Museum. I'm actually a recent transplant to Sterling from Leesburg as well. So this was a really fun opportunity to get to learn more about my new neighborhood, you know, and about some of the dairy culture in this area. And I have to give a special shout out to Lori Kimball, Wynn Saffer, and Donna Bohannon, because I borrowed a lot of these materials from a talk that was given last year at the Heritage Farm Museum about these families and about these resources. So I've condensed a lot of that knowledge here. I'm really excited to share it. And I'm also looking forward to leaning on Lori if there are folks who have some more questions about these families, because it's a really great story. I think everyone knows how the dairy industry, you know, story wraps up here in Loudoun County, so I don't think anyone will be surprised to know that it's a bit of a sad ending, you know, but there are some positives in terms of artifacts, resources, and oral histories that we've saved from these families and others in the dairy industry. So I'll go ahead and jump right in with a once upon a time. So once upon a time, of course, all the land between the Potomac and Rappahannock rivers was owned by Lord Fairfax, the 6th Baron of Cameron. And to get us in the zone of the geographic point that we're looking at modern day Sterling area. On this map where you see the 1772 land grants that were portioned out from Fairfax and his land grantor out to folks who are purchasing these grants. So the Sterling area is this kind of pink apricot sort of color on the map here. And you can see superimposed over that is a modern day map. Route 7 runs right through it. So just as Eric was talking about our connector points to markets, you know, and to get dairy from one point to another, that's going to be a major player, although the folks in 1772 don't know that yet. But this is the land, this is the area where the Eads and Ewing and Fitz families are going to come to some 150 years later in the post-Civil War era in, you know, the early 20th century. So to talk more about those families and where they're coming from, we are familiar with thinking about folks from New York, Pennsylvania, some of the northern states, all coming down to Virginia in the early part of the 20th century and setting up their horse farms and their dairy farms. Well, the Eads, Fitz, and Ewing families actually came up from Lee County, Virginia, which is I think it's as far away as you can get from Loudoun County, but still be in the state of Virginia. So Lee County is in the far southwest corner of Virginia, but it is, you know, easily traversable by the Valley Turnpike of the time. Jonesville is the county seat of Lee County, and Rose Hill was the little town where they were living. However, the next town over is Ewing, so I have to imagine that the families have some longtime connections to that county. We are not sure what inspired these families to come up to Loudoun. It could be that they read about Westmoreland Davis and his scientific dairy that he was starting up at Morven Park. It could be that they had family ties and kinship in the Loudoun area that made it an easier journey for them, that they knew where they were going to land. Either way, we do know that in 1918, the families purchased land in the area and started coming up. When we're talking about these families, we're really talking about married pairs and brothers and sisters in here. So the main couple that we're talking about tonight are William and Flora Fitz Eads, and they eventually have a large number of children there at the farm as well. We also have Flora's brother Austin and his wife Rosa. And then we also have two separate Ewing couples as well, and they all journey up to Loudoun County and start their farms between 1918 and 1920. So this is the journey they would have taken. I can imagine it didn't take 6 hours and 51 minutes for them to make the journey from Rose Hill up to Sterling, Virginia. Of course, there was the Valley Turnpike there, and the roads were somewhat accessible most of the year, but it would have been quite the journey, almost 450 miles, again, across the state to get up to Northern Virginia. And this is the area they will be settling in. So again, comparing some of our land grant deeds, on the left-hand side, you can see a portion of the Broad Run snaking its way up through the county, and you can just make out there's a yellow highlighted portion, which is called Pigeon Hill as early as 1845. And just along the southern border of this tract is the Leesburg Georgetown Turnpike, so today's Route 7. On the right hand of this screen, you can see a better, probably an easier to comprehend rendering of the same land plat. Again, in yellow, we have what will be Pigeon Hill, where the Eads will settle down. And over this, you can see where the modern map coincides. So again, you see Route 7 is that boulder road that runs along the bottom portion of the plat. But then you can also see where we have some of our modern roadways and neighborhoods that will pop up over time, you know, throughout the next century. So this is a map that you will see come up a couple of times in this presentation, specifically looking at on the right where you see this wedge shape being created between Route 7 running underneath the plat and then State Route 777, now 777 road, up by Countryside there. So this will be a recognizable angle that you'll see kind of throughout the presentation that'll help ground you of where we are on the map when we're talking about the Eads family and Pigeon Hill. So they're coming all this way to get to that point. And so 1918, William Eads and Austin Fitz, they band together to purchase over 200 acres. And then shortly after that, they're able to finish out the plot another 31 acres. Soon after, Fitz sells his share to Eads. So the Eads family will own this plot, Pigeon Hill, outright. You'll also notice a very important spelling change happens at this time. Flora Fitz Eads thought that adding a D to Pigeon Hill made it a little more unique, maybe a little more dignified. And so Pigeon Hill with a D became the official moniker of the farm throughout the family's ownership of the tract. And so the Eads family will own the tract, but the Fitz family still lives nearby and will often be working on the farm, you know, as paid labor, or, you know, sometimes just family members helping out on the farm throughout the Eads family's ownership of it. Let's do more maps, why not? So when the Eads and Ewing and Fitz families move into the Sterling area, they're by no means moving into a vacuum, you know, of community or a vacuum of culture of folks that are already here. One of the families that we often talk about here in the Sterling area is the Knox family. The Knox family had been in the area for a few generations already, probably predating the Civil War. The family is very proud of their heritage, that at one point, several great-grandfathers ago, the family served in the house of George Washington. So thinking about a long-time American family, African-American family, and they had also purchased throughout the late 1800s different plots of land along the Potomac View Road, what we now know as Knox Boulevard. And so we see, for example, Clarence Knox has a property there, and also a settlement of homes and small businesses and church all along Potomac View Road between Potomac View and what is now Claudmore Park, that windy bit just on the other side of Cascades Parkway. By 1823, there had been a one-room schoolhouse in the area that burned down, and the Knox family set aside an acre of land to build a new one-room schoolhouse there for the African-American children of the Sterling area. So knowing that the Eads family and the Ewing family had children, that is likely where their children would have gone to school during that time. And so when I mentioned the Ewing family earlier too, you can see where they settled just over to the east from Pigeon Hill, and they bought their land along the same timelines of the Eads family as well. And it was December 1917 that Thomas and Alling purchased, 140 odd acres. And then, as a few years go by, they expand that land holding. So it's not just that they are coming out here to, I like to think of it as a gold rush, but for dairying, that maybe they're trying to cash in on this new wave of prosperity of dairying here in Loudoun County, but they're also looking for a place where their family units can be part of a community, especially in the Jim Crow era in Virginia. So now looking more at the human element of the Eads Dairy Farm at Pigeon Hill. And this is going to touch on a lot of what Eric was saying about transportation, about technology. On the left here, you see some beautiful Holstein cows. This photo is taken in 1955, so our own, elevation has not yet hit the scene. Nevertheless, these cows are producing very well for the family. And you can see in the background, there's this very large barn with 2 cupolas over top of it and a silo in the back. This looks quintessential dairy to us now, but at the time it would have been state-of-the-art technology. It would have been, absolute best practices for sanitation, for production, and for, chemical cooling, keeping things cool. To have your dairy production there. A lot of the times in historic villages, older areas, from the mid-19th century or before, your dairy shed is really like a run-in shed. It's kind of a squat building. It's dark, and it's kind of moist, especially in Virginia. In the summertime, it gets very humid, and you would get a lot of cold and flus being passed around from cow to cow to cow. So in the early 20th century, the idea of having a large, airy barn, lots of air circulating, windows, clean light, things like that, that was a newer idea, and we often take it for granted that that's what a barn is supposed to look like. But it was, this was an improvement. This was scientific thought that was put into their dairy barn. Similarly, on the right, we were talking about how railroads make dairy trade a lot more possible. Well, fortunately for the Eads family, they are right on the Georgetown and Leesburg Pike. So they're actually going to use a truck to get their milk from point A, being their farm, to point B, being the seal test creamery in Georgetown. And they're actually going to haul milk for some of their neighbors as well. So this is going to be, hopefully an added bonus where they're going to be able to run this milk in addition to producing it and getting it turned around by seal test. These are some more views of the farm. Now, when we're talking about dairy farms of that era, it was often in collaboration with your usual home farm, right? So the Eads, they had chickens, they had hogs, they had ponies, and dairying may have been their main source of income, their main practice. They still operated a farm also for subsistence and for, selling some other smaller kinds of products on the side. The family has shared lots of fond memories of summertime at the farm and visiting family members, having get-togethers. I'm told there was a favorite pony named Patsy. I'm not sure if the photo on the top right is Patsy, but I like to think that she is. You also get another view of the barn there in that photo with the silo behind, and we will see the silo later, so take note of that. The family had 2 different living buildings built on the farm. On the left, you see the main Eads family farmhouse, and there's some of the family members there. On the top right, though, during the 1920s and 30s, I believe, they built the Rock Inn Tavern, is what they called it, the building on the right there. And they built it using field stones from the area. And if any of you have done any gardening in Eastern Loudoun, as I have, you'll know that there are plenty of stones still out there. If anyone wants to come build a house with them, let me know. And this Rock Inn Tavern was apparently run as a tavern for several years, and then as a rental residence as well. The photo on the bottom right is of Flora Fitz Eads. Her husband, William Henry Eads, passed away in 1938, and Flora continued to run the farm, being the sole proprietor with family help, of course. But she was proud of the fact, she always said that she was the first one to run an electrical milking machine in Loudoun County. And knowing that her husband passed away in 38, you'd have to think it must have been right during that time, the late 30s, early 40s. And again, knowing that rural electrification tended to follow the major state routes, and they happen to be between, DC and Leesburg, it's very possible that they were able to get electrification before a lot of the more remote dairy farms that you had, even in Eastern Loudoun. So fast forward a few years, Flora passed away in 1978, and it's at that time that it's after that time that the property was sold. She had sold off a parcel in the 50s, but for the main part, the tract remained together. Pigeon Hill today, again, Route 7 here along the bottom, and then 777 road here creating this angle. So what we see is really divided in half what the Pigeon Hill property is between the subdivision and then these shops. But I do have some comparisons showing us some more specific views of kind of then and today for the Eads family. So on the left, you should recognize the Rock Inn Tavern that we just saw, or the Rock House is another term that they used for it. And this building is still standing. It has been repurposed. It's now part of the Sunrise Senior Living Center at Countryside. And this is actually the view from the Countryside parking lot. So you're seeing the back end of the house. If you're driving westbound on Route 7, you can just barely glimpse it through the trees. I don't recommend doing that because you could almost kill yourself like I did today, trying to like crane my neck over and see it out the window. But if you go into the parking lot, you get a better look of the Rock House. It has, of course, been changed some over the years, but is intact, and it's really neat to see. Then, of course, we have the barn, and more specifically the silo. And so this is a view of the silo from 1955, and then on the right, this is a view of the same silo in 2013. Some of you guys may recognize this silo from its more recent appearance at the Countryside Marketplace. In 2013, they decided to redo the shopping center, and moving the silo or updating the silo, it was decided it was not a priority, or it wasn't possible to keep the silo intact. And so the silo was taken down, but the county made sure to set aside a few silo tiles so that they could be properly stored, properly interpreted, as a landmark of this family, of the dairy industry, and of the farming communities in Sterling, Virginia. And so this is a then and an also then photo, but then the now photo is that we are still able to preserve and talk about and share the stories of the Eads families and the Ewing families and the Fitzes and the Noakes, of course, here at the Loudoun Heritage Farm Museum. And I would like to end on a very positive note that the museum is open Tuesday through Sunday to walk-in visitors now. And we would love to see you out in Sterling to come take a look and learn about these communities. We have a great temporary exhibition up about some of the Black villages in Loudoun County, and more information about the Eads and the Fitzes and the Ewings and the Noakeses. So that is all that I have for this evening. And I'm now going to go ahead and pass it on to Lori Kimball, who's going to tell us more about the later years of dairying in Loudoun County. So without further ado, take it away.
Thanks, AnneMarie. And I'm going to start switching over to my PowerPoint now. And I'm going to talk about the last days of dairy farming in Loudoun County. And as Eric talked a bit in his presentation, Eastern Loudoun had a large number of dairy farms. Now, dairy farms were spread throughout the county, but there were a large number in Eastern Loudoun. And the image on the left is a view of Route 7 and Loudoun County Parkway. I think it's the 1957 aerial of that area and that intersection. And then over on the right, you can see what it looks like today. And that's pretty much the beginning of what is becoming developed as One Loudoun, and down further throughout the parkway. But dairy farms, while prevalent in Eastern Loudoun, stretched all the way out into Western Loudoun and Northern Loudoun, including Lovettsville. There were a number of dairy farms around Lovettsville. And this photo is of the Reed Dairy Farm, circa 1957. The Reed family purchased the property in the early 1900s, and they purchased it. It's on the southeastern side of town, just as you're coming up the Berlin Turnpike and going into the town of Lovettsville. And they purchased it from the Roos family. The Roos family had been farming there since the 1700s. Now, it wasn't a dairy farm back then with the Roos family, but they were growing the traditional crops in Loudoun County, wheat and corn and other cereal crops. But the Reed family acquired it, and they had constructed this dairy barn that you can see here on the left by the mid-1950s. And the image on the right shows you an image of the farm from the 1950s, and you can see just how wide open that area is. And here's an image of what the farm looks like today. Now, it had been abandoned for a while. In the early 2000s, the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors purchased the property to be developed as a community park for Western Loudoun and Lovettsville in particular. So over on the right-hand side, you can see the rough outline of the park. You can see the town of Lovettsville growing up there to the north as compared to the slide that we just looked at. And you can see in that yellow circle several of the historic buildings, including that dairy farm. And a close-up on the left-hand side, you can see the former farmhouse, and you can see the dairy barn to the right-hand side. Now, this is a different view of the property looking towards the west, towards the mountains. And you can see this was taken, I think, very late last year or early this year, but you can see the land as it's being developed for what's going to become the park. And over on the left-hand side, you can see the arrow pointing to the historic buildings. What the county plans for that park is the historic farmhouse had to be taken down earlier this year. It was in very bad shape. But the county plans to retain several of those other outbuildings, including the dairy barn, including the smokehouse and the kitchen, and to use them for interpretation about the farm's history when it opens. I think this passive part of the park with the historic buildings will open in 2023. Now, here's another farm that I want to talk about. It's two of the Potts family farms. And this first one is Orchard Crest Farm in the Purcellville, Hillsborough area. It's been owned by the Potts family since 1747, and it is no longer a dairy farm. It's now primarily beef, cattle, corn, and hay. But it did, in the early part of the 1900s, before it became a dairy farm, they were growing there primarily apples and grain crops, and thus the name Orchard Crest. But they were too far away from the railroad to haul milk to the depot. So as Eric earlier talked about, the benefit of being near a railroad depot in order to haul your milk there. This farm was too far away. So they did not turn to the dairying industry until after World War II, when milk trucks became more prominent and could pick up milk at farms and transport that milk either to the railroad depot or into Washington, D.C. And so that's when Edwin Potts bought a herd of Holsteins and transitioned to the dairy business. And they operated as a dairy farm until 2005, when they closed down the dairy operation and turned to mostly beef cattle and hay. And hay, you can see the boundaries here on the left. This is a 1957 aerial on the left, and on the right, what the farm looks like today. And so those boundaries haven't changed. And Orchard Crest is recognized as a Virginia Century farm. And by that designation, I mean that it's a farm that has been continuously operated as a farm for over 100 years. And there are several in Loudoun County, and Orchard Crest is one of them. And so the decline of the dairy industry starts around the early 1960s. And this information comes from a very good book about the dairy industry in Loudoun County called The Story of Loudoun's Dairy Industry by Bill Harrison and others. And Bill was one of the key people in getting the Loudoun Heritage Farm Museum started back in the late 1990s. And the construction of Dulles Airport was sort of the start of farmland being sold off for other reasons. When the government was acquiring land for Dulles Airport, about 5,000 acres of mostly farmland was constructed or purchased to construct the airport. And that included the predominantly African-American community of Willard, which was obliterated for the construction of the airport. And with Dulles also came then more growth in Eastern Loudoun County, that growth of urban and suburban development, Sterling Park, and then Countryside and other places, and then that growth starting to move west and along the Route Corridor and elsewhere, the Southwestern Corridor, and farmland being bought up to convert into planned communities and for other uses. And also, this lack of acreage obviously contributed to the decline in the dairy industry, but also to some degree, some farming in general, as there was either no more acreage available or very high prices for that acreage. Also, lack of labor was a qualified labor, people who knew about farming, knew about dairy farming in particular. It was easier, you know, with a dairy farm, the cows have to be milked at least twice a day, and it's a 24/7 operation. And so people were finding that they could get good paying jobs in other industries, construction, office jobs, and so forth. And then there was a decline in milk prices that dropped over time and making it, you know, very difficult for farmers to meet expenses. And then the increase in costs, such as land, feed, machinery, and other things. And then inheritance taxes. As the taxes grew on farming, farms were often sold just to pay the state and federal inheritance taxes. And so we see that decline starting. And this is a chart from that book that I mentioned. As you can see here in 1949, the number of milk cows in Loudoun County, about 15,000. And then by 1997, only 520. And as you look across the chart, the number of farms with dairy sales, the value and so forth, those numbers going down. In the 1950s and 60s, Loudoun had been #1 in Virginia for the number of dairy farms and dairy cows. But by 2006, only one dairy farm remained in the county. And that dairy farm is Dogwood Farm. And that's the other Potts farm that I want to talk about today. If you drive down Lincoln Road between Percival and Lincoln, you'll see the Dogwood Farm sign out on the road. That farm has been in the family for over 200 years. It's a 4th generation dairy farm, and they are currently milking about 90 registered Holsteins. And some fun facts out of our archival material, the marriage licenses. 2 Potts brothers, you'll see here their names underlined in blue. Thurston Potts from the Hillsborough-Percival area, and Jennings Potts married 2 Brown sisters, Ruth and Mary, on the same day, August 8th, 1923, in Lincoln, Virginia. And Thurston Potts his family owned Orchard Crest, the farm that we just talked about. And Jennings Potts owned the farm that we're about to talk about now, and that's Dogwood Farm. Here are images of dogwood over time. So on the left, 1937, you can see just how undeveloped that area in Percival is. Down towards the bottom of the picture, you can see the little village of Lincoln. The school is there. Then we transition over into 1957, and it pretty much looks the same. But by the time we get to the 2020 aerial, you can see how much, especially north of Dogwood Farm, how much of the growth from Percival has taken up some of that farmland to the north. And last year, Dogwood was recognized by the Maryland and Virginia Milk Producers Co-op for 100 years, celebrating their 100 years as a producer for that farm. And I was talking about the 2 Brown sisters who married 2 Potts brothers. It was Walter Brown, their father, who joined the Maryland Virginia Milk Producers Co-op in 1920. And so the present day owners of Dogwood Farm, Mike Potts is one of them. That was his great grandfather who joined the milk co-op. And I am now going to turn it over to Shannon for our Q&A session. We want to thank you for joining us for Dairy Month. June is Dairy Month, and we are celebrating that tonight. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, AnneMarie, and thank you, Eric, for your presentations. And thank you, Mr. Clemens, for your introduction to the program. So now we're going to start our Q&A session. So if you have any questions, you can either put them in the Q&A box or you can send them to me via chat. While we're waiting for some questions to come in, did our panelists have anything else they wanted to say about our dairy program or the dairy industry?
Well, I was actually curious if Eric had any more favorite elevation stories, if he wanted to share.
Apparently you've heard one of them. To clarify with our audience, first of all, we would love questions. There has to be some questions out there on our program tonight, but I'll let you in on a little known secret. Lori and I both came from the Farm Museum. I was the curator when we built the museum. Lori was the director for AnneMarie. So we all have a love for agriculture here in Loudoun County. And with the court records, we were really able to do some in-depth research on the property and the individuals through our historic court records. Now, my favorite elevation story. Okay, when we were building the museum, elevation was my favorite pod. That's what our exhibits were called, pods. And Select Sires is who own Elevation. Select Sires is an artificial insemination company, and they're located, I guess, best way to say, west of Columbus, very close to where my brother lives. And one Thanksgiving, we went out there, and I said, I'm going out to Select Sires. Well, they've had so many famous bulls in the last 50 years. They actually have a cemetery of famous bulls. So I went out there, found Elevation's grave, took a photograph of myself by it, which I can't find. They wanted me to use it tonight. I can't find. And all I can remember is my mom saying how embarrassed it was that I was posing by a tombstone for a famous bull. So yes, that's my elevation story. So
I like it.
Okay, so we have our first question from Q&A.
All right.
From Tony. He's wondering, where in Hamilton was the Kingsley Creamery located?
Wow. I can't really say. AnneMarie, Lori, do you have any idea? What's off of, I guess it would be business 7, but I'm not exactly sure where on business 7 it was.
It looked that way to me also, Eric. I'm flipping through Bill Harrison's excellent book here to see if I can find an answer to that question. But that would make sense that it was there.
Yeah, I was just driving through Hamilton today and I feel like I spotted it. So I'm pulling up Google Maps now to see if I could see it from like a street view somewhere. It's good. It's a stumper. That's a good question.
Yep. No, Eric, can't find it.
But Tony, if you want to email us, give us your email address. We'll locate it and send you where and tell you where it's at in Hamilton.
Okay, so I have another question here from Maisha. Her question is, she says, I'm not sure if this is a silly question or not, but there are historical records in the archives that one can view to see the history of dairy farming in the Sterling area. So are there historical records in the archives that someone could come in and view on dairy farming in Sterling?
You could come in, I mean, there's no file, so to speak, on dairy farming in Sterling, just one document will tell you everything. But you could come in, where we discovered a lot of my information, for example, I went through a lot of Chancery cases after from about 1880 on up to about the 1940s. So that's where I found a lot of my dairy information through Chancery cases. The other thing is with the Sterling area, if you just chain back property in Sterling, you'll probably chain back to a dairy farm. The same with Dulles International Airport. Interesting thing about Dulles International Airport, if you come here, we found it was actually not in the court records, but it was actually something the mapping division had. And they turned it over to us, and it was the plat of all the farms, and then the list of all the people that they purchased the farms from. Also, it gave the deed book and page number that the deeds where the land went from the owner to the airport authority. And you can actually go into our deed books. And what's really funny, once the airport starts, it's just one deed after another. You can go through one deed book and half the deed book. You just go through, it's the deed, a plat, then the next property, and you just keep going through and through. So it's just really a matter of just digging through our records, finding material, especially in our Chancery and deed and will books for farms out in the Sterling area, or for any farm in Loudoun County for that fact.
So sorry to interrupt, but I have a follow-up to Tony's question. Is the old Kingsley Creamery, is that where the Mosby Center is now? As you're driving through Hamilton, because it has the same kind of roof line. I could be wrong, but if I could share, I can show the street view of what I believe. Although I think the official records office should probably do a real investigation.
All right. If you'd like, I can pass it on to you to show
Yeah,
you.
I'd like to maybe Eric or Lori can shoot me down or point
Go
out,
right ahead. That's fine.
do some sleuthing.
I should have
Okay.
researched that more. I researched Route 54 because I thought that was going to be the big question.
Could that be it? So it's right there on Route 7 as you're passing through Hamilton. And that of course is assuming that, that the roof line is intact, and that is actually it. So Tony, I don't know if that's helpful.
And Mr. Clemens actually commented on that question too. He said he believed it was somewhere off of Sands Road, which used to be known as Lincoln Road.
The mystery.
Yeah.
I was looking in from Frontier to Suburbia, see if it mentions anything, but it doesn't for Hamilton Creamery. But we will certainly find out.
But I also have a comment from Ed who says, "Isn't that what was Hamilton Mercantile?" Yes. Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
Was that off Sands Road?
Good question.
We have any other questions out there?
Let's see, we have a question from Jason. Is there a place where we'll be able to find the questions and answers to, I guess, the questions that we're having in the Q&A?
Yes, we will, but we will post a video on our website, and you can link into it and view it, and we'll also send out another reminder to our friends group so they could look at it and watch the video. And if folks have more questions, they can directly email, the Farm Museum or the clerk's office with questions about what they saw tonight. We'll also have our programs, our PowerPoint programs up in PDF if you want to go back and look at the programs that were presented tonight. You might find them fascinating. You might have some more questions about the industry here and dairy industry in Loudoun County.
Let's see, we have another kind of a comment and a question from Ed. There are a number of retail creameries in Lovettsville, but I assume these are only for the local market.
That's a good question. That's a good question, Ed. Depending, it depends the time period in which those creameries popped up. I mean, during the era of road transportation, yes, they probably could have been shipping a lot of their produce into the DC metro area. But prior to road transportation, they probably just a local industry to supply the population because you are so far from a rail link. And of course, the river is north of there, so how widely used that was for transporting milk products, I couldn't say.
And Ed said up into the 1940s, he thinks they sold some in Brunswick, Maryland.
Well, that would make sense.
Mhm.
That's one aspect that we didn't even think of, that the Brunswick area, especially with the big rail junction up in Brunswick. And it's all, there's always the question too, how much of our dairy products were being shipped out of the county to support the war effort during World War II as well. We know a lot of our grain crops were going towards the war effort. I'm sure a lot of the milk products were, and it's something I've really not seen really much information on, how much of the dairy industry products were shipped to the U.S. government for the war effort between 41 and 45, or even post-war, because of the European rebuilding and Japan rebuilding after the war. That's a whole nother topic.
Well, we do know that that some American bull semen made its way over to Europe in the post-war era, because I have heard that there's some elevation progeny in France.
That's interesting you said that, because when I was at the Farm Museum, we had somebody from Japan, from their agricultural office, and he came in, he knew who elevation was, and this is Japan, so it was going as far as Asia as well. So
Famous.
All right, we'll wait a few more minutes to see if we get some more questions. I feel like Eric should explain what his background is. It's kind of interesting.
What, for the cows?
Yeah, the Bavarian cows.
Oh, okay. The cows behind me, I love cows, all right, and I love the dairy industry. That's why the Farm Museum was such a great place to work. But the cows behind me are not American from American Dairy Farm. They're actually from Germany. They're probably brown Swiss, and so small I can't see. A lot of them are brown Swiss or Swiss milking cows, and they're from Bavaria. And there's a tradition in Bavaria, and actually I should say in Germany and Austria, in the Alps. The cows go up to the mountains in the summertime to graze, and then they come back in the summertime. I mean, excuse me, in the fall. If none of the herd died up in the mountains during the summer, then they come back down with these headdresses on, and they have these huge parades in Austria and Germany where the cows come down from the mountains into the farming villages, and that's why they wear a headdress. Now, if they're coming down from the mountains without a headdress on, that means at least one cow had died during that summer period. So there's a tradition. I've been there, I've seen it, so that's why that's why it's behind me.
I feel like there are some folks out there who can sympathize with if their whole family makes it back from summer vacation in one piece, right?
Okay, looks like we don't have any more questions. So I think we were going to enjoy some ice cream. Was that the
That's
plan?
right.
Yeah, celebrating Dairy Month.
Okay. So thank you, everyone.
Cheers.
Melted.
Cheers.
Yes, cheers.
And don't ask where the first dairy ice cream place was in Loudon. I do not know.
What's everyone's favorite ice cream place in Loudoun?
Ooh. What is the one in Purcellville next to Monk's Barbecue? That one.
Oh, yeah.
What's yours?
I'm gonna say mine is the Grudos in Leesburg.
Mm.
As I was saying, my husband and I just moved from Leesburg, and we used to be in walking distance to Grudos, and it was kind of dangerous. So maybe it's for the best that I'm in Sterling now, but I am further away.
Now, there was an ice production plant in Leesburg, I believe in the early 1920s, basically over where Tuscarora Mills is today, and they produced ice. Now, if they produced ice cream, I have no idea, but with electrification, of course, you could start having industries like that popping up.
So Maisha in our chat said that her family frequents Abbott's in Sterling.
I'll have to try that one out. I have not been to Abbott's.
Well, for us in the court archives, we just go up to the cafe at the floor above us, and he has ice cream sandwiches, so that's where I usually go. And
Not
sometimes
bad.
our clerk of circuit court during the hot months and busy weeks during the summer months, he'll bring in ice cream for us. So
Okay, so I think this is a good stopping point. So thank you, AnneMarie. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Lori. And if you do have any other questions, feel free to email us and we'll be able to get back to you about the dairy industry or genealogy or history. And I guess I'll pass it on you to Eric so you can give us a closing off message here.
oh, goodness. Okay, one last thing here. During our research, I found something really interesting here. In our court records, this is from 1849, and it's a court order from the justices of the court here in Loudoun County, and it said that for the courthouses only be used for religious services and public meetings, that no horses or cows are allowed on the courthouse lawn. So the reason you don't see cows or horses on the lawn, well, in 1849, the justices forbid that happening. So I thought that was an interesting piece of history there that we found in our papers. And this is just one of the things when you come in and research our indexes or just looking through our papers, you find small things like that that just opens the door to so much more information in our court records. So I encourage everybody to come in and use the court records for family history or Loudoun County history. My staff will show you how to, chain a deed back or how to look at a probated will and what to look for in the Chancery case. It's all here. And another aspect about Loudoun County Archives, our historic records, is it's one of the best preserved historic records, collect court records in the state of Virginia. We're only about one of 5 counties who have probably about 98, 99% of our records dating back to 1757. And the reason for that was that the records during the Civil War, the justices at the beginning of the war said to the county clerk at that time, George K. Fox, please ship them to Campbell County, Virginia. And that's in Southwest Virginia. And that's where they stayed until the end of the war. And they came back in 1865. And because of the justices and George K. Fox, these records are here for us to give wonderful presentations like that and to provide all the support our other historic institutions and genealogists and researchers need across the state and country to come in and use our records. So I thank you all for coming here tonight. And like I said, this video will be posted. And if you have further questions, please email us. We love good historic questions. And if you want to know good stories, you can ask us that too. Thank you and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.